As we've laid out at the end of the last video, the 1980s and early 90s were for the most part a dark age for movie titles, with very few innovations. We'd have to wait until the mid-90s for things to get interesting again. But, before we get there, there's a few people we've been neglecting. We talked at length about Saul Bass's colorful masterpieces and Pablo Ferro's handwritten fonts and fast editing. And in this episode, we'll discuss the work of the last giant in the world of film title design. But, before we move on, we should at least acknowledge the work of a handful of other brilliant innovators in this field. ... One of Saul Bass's contemporaries was Maurice Binder, the graphic designer who conceived the abstract, erotic imagery of James Bond's opening credits, which, after Dr. No, were taken up by Robert Brownjohn. We can't forget the team behind the Patifree Lang Enterprises that created the amazing intros for the Pink Panther series since 1963. There's Dan Perry, known for several collaborations with Martin Scorsese. But Perry's top credit is, without a doubt, this one. This is an example of Terry Gilliam's outrageous cutout animations. There's Richard Greenberg, of whom Saul Bass said, quote, "He's the only guy around whose work I wish I had done." There's also Robert Dawson, Randall Balsmeyer, Richard Williams, and more recently Karen Fong, Jeremy Cox, and Aaron Sorofsky. One by one, all these artists stood on the shoulders of giants, and the last of them is Kyle Cooper. Cooper's the main title designer of several big screen creature features. Not only worked on Godzilla vs. Kong, but also on Kong Skull Island, Godzilla King of Monsters, 2014's Godzilla, and my personal favorite, the Japanese Godzilla Final Wars. If you add Pacific Rim Uprising, you'll have Cooper's entire body of work. When it comes to monster movies, that is, because those 6 titles account for less than 3% of his 300-strong filmography. But before becoming the go-to guy for film design in Hollywood, Cooper started small and weird. He's credited as the title designer on this 1988 comedy, which is almost impossible to find. But if you find it, please watch it.
Nobody leaves until the funeral is over.
Cooper went from Peter Wang's Laserman to designing the titles for Scorsese's Life Lessons, and he was off to the races. He worked on Body Parts, Body Snatchers, Curly Sue, Passenger 57, Indecent Proposal, Richie Rich, True Lies, The American President, Dead Presidents, and Braveheart. Freedom! Though there were some absolute gems in the mix, for the most part he was a nameless figure in the background. But that all changed in 1995. This opening sequence was named by the New York Times as one of the most important innovations of the 1990s. If Saul Bass brought modernist design to the movies, Pablo Ferro sped it up to the limit of human comprehension. Now Kyle Cooper brought a new sensibility into the language of cinema, a taste for subtly deranged typographic details over large-scale special effects.
This is a quote from Jean-Luc Godard.
And Godard is someone who knows a thing or two about great title sequences.
Now, what do we think about this?
Like any title designer worth their salt, Cooper is often compared to Saul Bass, and although some titles do have similarities, like this one, or 1999's Wild Wild West, his trademark still owes more to the early experimental filmmaking techniques from the likes of Len Lai and Stan Brakhage. He uses type that nervously jumps around the screen, all glitchy and motion blurred. The editing combines cross dissolves with hard cuts, and there's always the odd flash frame that hints at subliminal imagery. Cooper repurposed elements of this aesthetic in Mission Impossible, The Island of Dr. Moreau, 1997's Spawn, Guillermo del Toro's Mimic, A Nightmare on Elm Street or the Godzilla franchise. Like Bass, ideologically, Cooper believes the title sequence should serve the story, and like Bass, critics have often said his titles are better than the movies they're in. But as far as I can tell, the similarities stop there. If you look at these two sequences side by side, you'll understand why. They're from two films virtually identical in theme, made 30 years apart. Seconds is a science fiction drama about plastic surgery modifications. Dr. Moreau is a science fiction horror about genetic modifications. They're both directed by John Frankenheimer. The title sequence on the left was directed by Bass, the one on the right by Cooper. To convey the unnatural changes to its lead, Bass tempered with the image to create undulating patterns.
I broke apart, distorted, and reconstituted the human face to set the stage symbolically for what was to come.
In Cooper's version, extreme close-ups and microscopic details flash on screen, but the true manipulation happens with the typography. Bass plays with the image while Cooper plays with type. Andrea Codrington noticed that, quote, in many of his title sequences, Cooper creates what could best be described as typographic method acting, words animate in a way that is appropriately symbolic of the film's content. Basically, the type acts. If you pause the island of Dr. Moreau's credits, you'll notice that in these flash frames, the type seems to disintegrate, like DNA breaking apart. In True Lies, the deceptive nature of the main character is represented in the negative space between the word true. Lies are literally hidden in the truth. Cooper does this constantly. In the zombie film Dawn of the Dead, the type bleeds. In Twister, it becomes debris in a storm. In Spider-Man, it gets stuck in a web like a fly. And in Daredevil, it goes from Braille to Latin script. The impact of Kyle Cooper's work naturally sparked a wider interest in title design. According to Deborah Allison, the preeminent scholar in title design, there was, quote, the re-emergence of an attitude that regards title sequences as interesting and enjoyable viewing material in their own right, that has led to the investment of vast amounts of time and money in title sequences, the main purpose of which seems to be to showcase innovation and skill, end of quote. The epitome of this investment was arguably Fight Club. The sequence displayed 1999's peak of computer-generated graphics. It took a team of designers the best part of 2 years to create and cost close to $1 million. Allison points out that throughout the history of cinema, periods of intense experimentation and flamboyance in title design have invariably been followed by a backlash, in which relative simplicity was favored for a while. Today, surveys show that the length of title sequences is at an all-time low. Case in point, even though we're not living in the golden age of title sequences, they're far from a thing from the past. You can still find a handful of films every year with great title sequences. One might argue that we are in the golden age of title design. But like so many things, it has moved to TV and streaming, where some of the most impactful, creative and experimental work in title design is being shown. But that's the subject for another time. This video was created in partnership with 99 Designs by Vistaprint. Check out their 99 days of design at 99designs.com/99daysofdesign.